Okay, hello YouTube. Today I'm going to comment on some of the news going on in the chess world. We had this draw happen between Daniil Dubov and Ian Nepomniachtchi. This was the final position in the game. As you can see, it was the starting position. And both players got double forfeited by the arbiter. This was in the Rapid and Blitz. So you can kind of hear some of the commentary here.
Look at what happened in this one. Look at
Wow,
the moves
but
they played.
no, but be careful because actually there is the certain danger that the arbiter can forfeit you for this. I think it happened in old times, in something like in the 80s, when two friends played like this, they were given 2 zeros.
Keep going. I want to show everybody how this game finished, just move by move.
So they're just dancing the knights around.
And then they went to each other's starting square. So the game ended up being a draw because they agreed to it. And you can, of course, double forfeit the players for not playing, for not trying. But what I don't understand is when people make the Berlin draw, why is that any better by making...
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, and that comment right at the end about the Berlin draw, that's something else that I kind of want to address. But the main thing is why do players take draws in the first place? You know, back when I was playing just to win tournaments and then get prize money to move on to the next tournament, back in the early 2000s, it was very, very critical that I came in, one of the top 3 places in every single tournament. And one of the things you have to understand about like Swiss system tournaments, especially Swiss system tournaments, open tournaments in the U.S., is the Swiss system is not that great of a system. It's actually pretty bad, especially the way that we do the Swiss system here in the United States. It's absolutely terrible. We rank everybody according to their rating, with the top ratings going up on the top and the low ratings going on the bottom. What this does is the original intention of the Swiss system is exactly what it does. It delays the pairings of the top players until the very end. So the top players get a bunch of rounds where they play against the guys in the bottom half of the tournament until everybody in the top has beaten somebody in the lower half of the tournament, which might take 3 or 4 rounds. And if it's only a 5-round tournament, that means that you've delayed any top players playing against each other until round 5. And then when they get to round 5, sort of like all the places have been decided at that point in terms of prize money. Because a lot of times there's not a huge difference between getting first or getting first, second, and third split 3 ways. It might be a $10 difference. So you just get to the last round, and the whole goal of the Swiss system was to delay the pairing of the strong players to the last round. So we have these exciting last round showdowns. Well, because of the mathematics of it, and because you have players that just need to make this money, the exact opposite happens. They get into the last round, they play 7 moves, they offer draws, and they shake hands. Because the prize money isn't different, and they would rather just go home and sleep because it's just not worth the stress. It's not worth the mental energy. It's not worth, $10, to risk, sometimes 200 or 300. You're betting $10 against 200 or 300. So it's an interesting bet. It's like you're saying, if you want to play the game, you're saying that you're 10 times or 20 times better than your opponent and that you're going to win that game 20 times out of, it's ridiculous. I took a whole bunch of last round draws, and I got, in so much hot water for it, like in chess publications back in the early 2000s. It was like it was Minnesota Chess Journal wrote an article about it, about how last round draws were running chess, and they said Robert Plunkett is going for some kind of record. And what was interesting was they were talking about all these last round draws that I took against international masters and even grandmaster elects. I took about maybe 3 last round draws against Stanislav Smetankin, maybe 2 last round draws with international master Victor Adler, and a couple other guys. They were all IMs or GM elects. And they were all higher rated than me usually by like almost a whole class, like, 200 points or more. And, so in order for me to fight that out, I'm not just saying that I'm a better player than them with the amount of money that I was gambling against. I'm saying that I'm 20 times better than a GM elect that's rated, 200 or 300 points higher than me. It's an absolutely ridiculous statement to make. So they need to change the Swiss system. You need to randomize the starting positions of the ratings so that you get earlier clashes between stronger players. That's number one. Now, of course, this is a totally different situation with these top-level players. They're playing in round-robin events, and they're playing against guys that are at their level every single round. So the main factor for them is just fatigue. They're playing all these long games. They're not getting any quick victories. They're not getting any really quick wins against lower rated players early in the tournament, so they kind of get a rest. They're playing long games every single game, or at the very least, even in a rapid and blitz, they're playing hard games every single game. So eventually they just don't want to play. And like the commentator pointed out, there's a lot of ways to do that without making it look totally ridiculous. Like, Nakamura and Carlsen's Bong Cloud draw. That probably also should have been double forfeited because it's very clear that neither player is trying. Now, I understand there's meme chess and all this other stuff, but if you're clearly not trying or not even trying to make it look like a chess game, we shouldn't do that. Now, of course, there's a lot of draws in chess that people are, at least should be at the top level mutually familiar with. One of them is, the so-called Berlin draw. That happens after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Knight f6 is the Berlin defense. Castles, knight takes e4. Here you play d4 with just the main line, knight d6. Now, if white wants to play for a win, he can play bishop takes c6, d takes c6, d takes e5, knight f5, exchange queens, and he can just play for a win from here. This is all just slight edge white. You can see all my comments and notes over here, so you can kind of see why people go for these draws. Basically, what most of these draws are is white decides that he just wants a draw. And if white decides that he wants a draw, a lot of times, depending on the opening, it's very difficult to stop it. Sometimes white can just force it. It's usually white's responsibility to kind of play for a win, especially when you're playing against something like the Berlin. Because if you play this drawing line after d4, knight d6, the drawing line is d takes e5. You sacrifice this bishop temporarily, then you play a4 to get the bishop back. Now, of course, there's ways to try to keep the position spicy if you're black, but if you play anything other than this main line, you're playing with a slight disadvantage with the black pieces. So now you have to choose between playing for a slight disadvantage and simply allowing this force to draw after knight d4, knight d4, knight d4, queen d4, and these are all computer best moves. d5, e takes d6, queen d6, queen e4 check, queen e6, queen d4, queen d6, queen e4 check is perpetual. So you might be saying, well, could white deviate? Could somebody deviate and play for a win? I mean, we could try something like queen e3, but then, of course, bishop e6 equalizes because the queen is no longer hitting b7. So you give black a free developing moves. Now, who wants to do that? So, once you get to a certain point, once you get to this spot, it's not clear that there's any way to really deviate and still be playing best chess. So you can't force somebody to play second best chess, basically. You can't say you have to play inferior chess just so that we can get a game. If white decides to play certain lines and certain variations, he can go into these draws. As a matter of fact, the very first win that I got against somebody rated over 2200, not my first win against a master, because my first win against a titled master was a different game. That was against Roger Rudolph. My first win against somebody rated over 2200 went e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, f4, bishop g7, knight f3, c5, bishop e5 check, and my opponent played the very inferior knight f d7, dc5, dc5, e5, giving me a decisive advantage with the white pieces very early. And then I ended up going on to win, even though there was a pretty big deficit in ratings. I was rated 1800, he was rated 2200, plus 2250, and I still beat him, because e5, I have a major advantage with white, and it was enough for me to press into a win. But here's what he was worried about. When he played knight fd7, he was very concerned that I intended after bishop d5, and by the way, I did intend to go for the draw. After bishop d5 check, bishop d7, there's a forced draw here. You can play e5, knight g4, e6, and then, the best move is really fe6. You can play bishop takes b5. You can play something different. And then after takes on f7, we could have either king d7 or king f8. The overall assessment is actually about the same. Let's just take king f8, knight b5, queen a5 check, knight c3, cd4, knight d4. Now let's say bishop d4. We could play queen d4, and we're hitting the rook on h8, knight f6, bishop e3, knight c6, queen d2. King f7, castle's queenside is just major advantage white. And a lot of the lines here are very similar. There's definitely different directions the king could go. That's not totally all the theory of this opening isn't the subject of this video, but needless to say, I got all the lines right here, and everything either leads to either decisive advantage white or major advantage white if you play these e takes f7. So basically, if your opponent knows the theory really well, whether you play king d7 or or king f8, if they know the theory really well, they're not going to get into any trouble. Like you can try all kinds of different stuff, like queen h5 if they just know about knight e4 with the idea of bringing the knight back to g3. This is supposed to be decisive advantage white. They could try h5, but if they just play h3, knight c6, and then retreat the knight, you're having to retreat your knight and then retreat the bishop is supposed to be decisive advantage white, etc., etc., etc. So he didn't want to play this. That's the thing. It's after e6, f takes e6, white can force a draw with knight g4, bishop takes b5, and here again, white has an opportunity to play for a win. You can play queen takes g4 here, and this position is supposed to be some sort of slight edge white. Queen takes g4, and white's supposed to have some sort of slight advantage here. And I love this position. I've played this position a whole bunch with the white pieces. Nothing wrong with it. You can go for this. But if you don't want to, you can, again, just force a draw. You can play knight takes e6. This forces a draw. You're forking the queen and bishop, and then black has to play bishop takes d4, and then you take the queen, and then we have bishop f2, king d2, and this was the draw that was going around back then. This is draw by perpetual. So there's this draw, there's the draw in the Berlin. I mean, you can reach a draw by perpetual, especially after e4. You can reach a draw by perpetual really easy at the top levels if both players are familiar with the theory. And at the top levels, usually both players are familiar with the theory. So if white just wants to get a draw, he plays e4, and black either plays d6 or plays e5 and plays a Berlin. It's a pretty quick path to get to a draw. Now, I guess if top players don't want to play, and they just want to get draws in the last round, they have to do this, because at least it looks like they're trying. At least you can't make them do something else. You can't tell them, okay, you have to play inferior moves with black, because we just absolutely have to see a game. But, I mean, as you can tell, I'm kind of on the side of the players here. I have a lot of sympathy for guys trying to take draws in the last round. Tournament situation, fatigue, all this stuff plays a factor. I do respect the fact that we want to make the game interesting. I respect the fact that we want to, restrict draw offers to move 30. We want to make players fight. We want to make the game entertaining. So there has to be some sort of balance there, and we have to find that balance because, one of the things is just make tournaments less grueling. Make it, don't have these long days where people are playing for 12 or 16 hours for like 3 or 4 days in a row. Have more rest days. Have more time in between. Make the tournaments less grueling so people can fight it out more. These are all things that we need to talk about and discuss to make the game of chess more interesting. Overall, I don't think it was a bad decision to forfeit both players. I mean, we can't have players making draws in totally ridiculous ways. I also think that probably Magnus Carlsen and Nakamura, when they did their Bongcloud draw, the arbiter probably should have double forfeited them as well. If you make an example of the world champion and the world's #1 blitz player, it's going to send a serious message to everybody else. So I think, and again, I mean, as far as top players are concerned, there's not much difference between a Bongcloud draw and this kind of draw. But to the fans, to the spectators, at least it looks like people are trying to do something. So this is maybe a little bit better. Anyways, that's kind of my 2 cents on the news of the day. I hope you found it interesting. Hope you learned something new about chess. And I hope you subscribe to my channel. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, and click on your notification icon. Thank you very much for watching.